ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ricky Burdett. I'm the director of LSE Cities. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late, but welcome to what is the first part of a two-part event. I think most of you know that, and I hope very much that you'll be able to stay for the second part, even though, of course, actually having three representatives from the main political parties here live is much more exciting and a great gift to the LSE and its audiences. This event is organized jointly by LSE Cities, which, as I say, I'm the director, and LSE London. Tony Travers, many of you will know him, is the director of that organization. What we're looking at today in asking these three representatives is the future of cities in Britain, and we will follow a well-known structure that Tony will describe in a moment. I just want to tell you what the logistics are for the evening. When this discussion ends, and it has to end punctually by 8, a number of the speakers need to move on quickly, we are offering you wine and nibbles outside for all of you, because you need some sort of sustenance for the next bit. So please enjoy that as hosted by these two organizations. If you want to go and get something to eat, go ahead. There are quite a few places around, but please come back so that you can see the televised program. We will start the screening of the program at 8:15, but the main Leaders Debate starts at 8:30. At the end of that, Tony has volunteered, and we have not forced him, to effectively make some comments or answer any questions about what you think has happened after that televised debate. So it's quite a rich evening. It's wonderful to see so many of you here, and I'm going to pass over to Tony to start the major event. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Ricky, and thank you all for coming this evening. We are in the middle of, or towards the end, actually, as I must say, for these politicians who are fighting it. They'll want to hear it's nearer the end, I suspect, whatever the result. Towards the end of a long 4 to 5 week, though it's actually been going on for longer than that, general election campaign. And of all the many issues that are raised in a general election campaign, there are always 3 or 4 which dominate. But there are also, for many, many people, lots of other issues that are very important, and of course which, as and when there is a new government in power, or the existing government retakes power, whichever party is in government, or parties, there is then a need to address the full range of issues, not just the ones that get highlighted 5 or 6 times during the general election, but everything else that isn't highlighted. And one of the issues that undoubtedly will be important to the government that takes office on the 7th of May or soon after will be cities and the future of public policy towards cities. Just, we all know the history of British industrialisation and deindustrialisation. Britain's cities, many of them, evolved because of rapid industrialisation in the 19th century. We've gone through deindustrialisation in Britain probably ahead of most, or certainly as one of the countries that went through deindustrialisation first. And this has led to extraordinary pressures on cities, which successive governments from the late 1970s onwards have put in place policies to tackle. And the rebuilding of cities and the undoubted revival of the inner parts of most of our cities, with some success moving out from the centre, has been a feature of public policy in recent years. I want to say no more than that, really, except to say that this is a sort of hustings event, and therefore we need to make sure we're fair to the parties here represented, to the individuals speaking, and for that reason, what I want to do is to ask each of them to speak for sort of 4 to 5 minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, as an opening statement about the future of their party's policies for cities, and then to take questions, which of course some of which may be aimed at one of the 3 parties, and if they are, I will, as the chair, then handle them so as to ensure the pressure is broadly equal on all 3 during the evenings. I want to make sure that this is a sort of lively event. I think unlike the TV events, if anybody wants to applaud or react. I think that's not a bad thing. It is an election after all. But let's try to keep it friendly and polite, so I don't have to use the event of public disorder thing that's sitting in front of me. Now, in the best traditions of ill-chaired meetings, I didn't actually talk to my distinguished three colleagues here who I need to introduce as to what order they should go in. But we have three distinguished speakers. Tessa Jowell, who's been a minister in the present government, who is here to represent the Labour Party. She is a London MP, a South London MP. Bob Neill, here to represent the Conservative Party, a shadow minister during the recent Parliament, a Labour MP, so Conservative MP, a London MP, I'm trying to say as well. And Lord Tom McNally, who is a distinguished Liberal Democrat, the party's leader in the House of Lords, and has a long political career. I'm afraid three of you have a long political career, don't you? Sorry about that. Okay, now I think I'm going to start. I'm going to Tessa. I'm going to put you on the spot. Can I ask you to go first, either from here or whichever you like for your opening?
Yes. Okay.
I'll go. I'll
statement,
just
then we'll
speak
from the.
Sorry to said you're first, but there we are.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Tessa Jowell for the Labour Party.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everybody for coming this evening. It's a really fantastic turnout, and I've been very encouraged throughout this election, where despite all the efforts of much of the media to kind of kill our interest, the debate and the curiosity about the issues has been as vibrant as the evidence of all you being here this evening. So I shall be unashamedly partisan in my pitch for the Labour Party about cities, regeneration and policy for future policy for cities. And I would like to argue that over the last 13 years, great cities like Leeds, like Birmingham, Manchester and Newcastle have all become resurgent, driven by the development of new industries in combination with investment by the public sector in the creation of infrastructure. And I think it's notable how many cities have been regenerated, certainly in part, by investment in culture. And, of course, the important thing is that cities become and are both economic engines, but also places where people want to live, not just in a transitory way, but places where people want to move from being on their own to bringing up their families and building the layers, the generational layers of community. Perhaps one of the biggest challenges has been dealing with areas of acute deprivation, both, if you like, physical deprivation, but also the inequalities that, by any measure, tend to define so many of our cities. Hence, the importance of programmes like the New Deal for Communities, which has now come to an end, and initiatives like the Working Neighbourhood Fund, which has helped move more than 200,000 people in England off out-of-work benefits. The regional development agencies have been absolutely vital in providing both a structure and a focus for investment and regeneration, estimated to have safeguarded about more than 200,000 jobs, with a leverage ratio of about £4.50 for every pound of taxpayers' money. So I think that we have had a lot of success in transforming cities, and transforming is a kind of rather overused word in an election campaign, but if I think that, you know, if you've gone to cities like Manchester and Birmingham, Liverpool 15 years ago and gone back any time in the last 2 or 3 years, you would have felt that transformation was a perfectly fair statement of the change. But clearly, This election is about the future. This election, more than anything else, is about the economy, about securing economic recovery, about maintaining a necessary level of public investment and public service in order to ensure that our cities remain viable and we don't see the progress achieved begin to fall back, which is why the balance that we have struck in our deficit reduction programme of tax increases, balanced by a very detailed programme of savings from the public sector linked to growth, is absolutely critical to realise. One of the most important things that we have done for London is to restore the government of London that the Conservatives under Mrs Thatcher removed. That has been, again, a force which has changed and improved the capital and which we believe can be a model for other cities across the UK. And then, of course, there is outside London the growth of city regions with the ability to accrue additional powers to improve transport, the development of skills, economic development, greater borrowing flexibility, and to deliver the benefits of those pooled budgets of what is called the Total Place programme. Also, the value of elected mayors. You know, the elected mayor of London has been a very successful innovation. Elected mayors, either in London or other parts of the country, similarly so. We do not, however, think that it's desirable that cities should have mayors imposed on them. Just a couple, because Tony's giving me the eye, a couple of very quick points. First of all, the importance of infrastructure. We are the only party in this election that has committed to the major infrastructure investment involved in Crossrail, upgrading Liverpool city centre or building the Manchester bus corridor. We also are committed to the creation of universal access to the next generation of high-speed broadband, and believe that growth will be driven, certainly in very large part, the million jobs, by jobs in the green industries. I am a proud Londoner. I played my part in bringing the Olympics to London. I feel very clear of the identity that I have as a Londoner. It was presented with great effect to the world by 30 young people from the East End of London who came with us to Singapore to win the Olympics for London. 30 young people who spoke 20 different nationalities, 22 languages. Our cities all have different faces, but as a Londoner, that for me, the diversity of London is the face of London. But creating, the job of government is to create the space for cities to develop their own identity and to flourish with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, you will have an opportunity to ask questions of any of the three politicians here tonight, but next I'm going to ask Bob Neill to put the case of the Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. I'm delighted to come along as well. I better declare an interest because about 30-odd years or so ago I was a student at this very institution, rather more than that actually, pushing 40 years ago now, where John Griffiths, amongst others, tried to get the principles of public law and other things into me. And I think I first came across the great George Jones, and I'm still something of a bit of a George Jonesite when it comes down to a lot of these issues. And I must say that the lecture there is a bit different from the way it was then, that's for sure. So it's good to come back. And that actually made me think that we've actually seen a lot of change. Tessa's right in that regard in cities over recent years, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to part company with her on some, but not all points, because I don't think policy for cities is something that is or should be something that's necessarily a purely partisan sort of ding-dong battle. I'm a Londoner. I spent the whole of my political career in London, in local government in London, on the GLC, on the London Assembly, and then subsequently as a London MP. But of course, London is not the only city, and it's not necessarily typical of the cities in London. So let's broaden it out. And I'd suggest that whilst we have seen success stories, and in many ways London is a success story, though a patchy success story, we see great wealth and prosperity, but we still see within this global city, the only global city, if you like, in the UK, something like 39% of children growing up in poverty, so there's still some issues there. But you then see other areas where not just me, but organisations like the Centre for Cities talk about failing cities. You go to Stoke-on-Trent, you go to Doncaster, you go to Barnsley. Some of those old northern industrial towns, they're lagging badly behind. And you've got a different type of city as well, the Cambridges, the Milton Keyneses, the Brightons, where on the back of new industry, new approaches, then there's a degree of vibrancy. So there's not a uniform pattern by any manner of means within the cities. And that brings me back to where I think we need to take a fresh approach to policy. One of the problems has been that although the government has invested money, it has done so through a very centralised approach, it seems to me. The creation of the Mayor of London, which actually, I'll concede, was the right thing to do. I was an opponent of abolition of the GLC at the time, and I think one of the refreshing things about David Cameron's leadership is a willingness to accept that things have moved on and we can learn from where things didn't work out before. So having a Mayor of London has worked. But as I say, London is a pretty unique city within the UK. But in many other respects, government in this country is usually centralised. And when you look at the other cities, as the Centre for Cities and others have demonstrated, contrast the provincial cities with their equivalents in other countries, and there's quite a big gap in terms of economic strength and competitiveness between London, which is right up there as one of the world players, and then you get quite a gap until you get down to the position of the Bristols and many of the other significant provincial cities. Now, why is that? I suggest to you that comes from a highly centralised state. Britain is the most centralised state in Western Europe, perhaps in all the Western democracies. That's grown up under parties of both, under governments of both parties, but it's a fact. And what I think we need to do is to restore initiative to the cities, and that involves restoring local initiative. So we want to take some of the things which have happened and put that together in, I think, a more comprehensible fashion. Mayors are part, potentially, of the option. I agree with Tessa that they shouldn't be imposed, but we are proposing, therefore, to have a referendum in the 12 largest cities in the UK so that the people there can decide whether or not they want to have a directly elected mayor. And we'll be looking to give, if they choose to do so, directly elected mayors much greater powers in relation to economic regeneration, greater say in relation to policing and a number of other key issues. The value that's available there is, if you like, a real driving force, as we've seen under mayors of both parties in London, to pull things together. But it's got to go more than just structure. There's got to be some leverage in a highly centralised local government finance system. That's why we are proposing that cities, whether they have mayors or leader of the council models, should have the ability to keep the proceeds of new development for a period of time. So we will enable cities of all types, large and small, to keep the council tax that's generated from new residential development. We will give them the power to keep the business rate that's generated from new business and commercial development for a period, say, of 6 years. There's no magic in the figure, but it's an important starting point. That's the first really significant transfer of resources from Treasury back to local discretionary spending, and I think that is crucial. Infrastructure investment is important. We can't assume in the current economic circumstances that can purely be driven through conventional means of Treasury grant funding. We shall give the cities the power to go to the market to raise bonds. It's perfectly normal in Europe, and it's perfectly normal in most of North America. There's prudential borrowing at the moment, but the logic is to take that further. It works very well everywhere else. What else should we do? We should enable cities to make themselves economically competitive by giving them the option to discount the business rate, to pull in business into their areas, to generate a genuine sense of competition. That's actually what made places like Manchester and Liverpool, Birmingham, Leeds powerful in the 18th, 19th centuries, was that competition between them. So it's to give them that sense of initiative there. The RDAs I'm not convinced by. At the end of the day, the arguments as to how much leverage they produce have been questioned by a lot of economists, but they certainly are an expensive and a rather remote means of doing it. Many of the programmes are necessary and are to be supported, but I don't think it's necessary to have the rather artificial regions that we have at the moment. So what we will be looking to do is to build upon the concept of the city regions by giving local authorities, in particular the cities and their hinterland, the power to come together, to form clusters, to form local economic partnerships who will be able to take over the functions and the funding of the RDAs upon more natural units based upon natural economic areas and natural and historic communities of interest. That's giving back real power to the cities, and what I hope we'll then see, Tony, is a situation where you have politicians who think it's not necessary to come to Westminster to make a difference, where they can actually think you can make a really big difference by being the mayor or being the leader of a big city council. And that would be a real transformation in our politics.
And last but definitely not least, Tom McNally, who is going to speak for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much, Tony. First of all, the kind of personal declarations. I didn't come to the LSE. I went to UCL. But in my first year, I used to come down for one lecture. There was some shared lectures in those days. And it was one of the most depressing periods of the whole week, because you'd walk past that library and all the LSE students seemed to do nothing else but study in the library, which was... I came to London in 1962 from the northwest of England. You'll get a kind of idea of how used I was prepared for metropolitan life, in that I got my first digs near Victoria Station, and for the first 3 days I caught the Circle line from Victoria to Euston Square until I thought there must be a quicker way of getting to college. But what I do say is that from that day to this day, I'm still in awe of London. I think it is one of the truly great cities of the world. And I say this when I'm in London, and I also say when I'm in the north. I don't think there is any advantage in trying to pull London down. It is a great city and a source of great pride. And I think the idea of a mayor for London has been a great success. I've got to say, I don't think when the Labour Party planned it that they thought they would get Boris. On the other hand, when they planned it, they didn't plan it to get Ken either. So it's been a great experiment in that case. The other point of your opening remarks, my 16-year-old son is a great fan of The Daily Show that comes across from the States. And apparently, the other day, they were saying what wimps we were, starting to flag after a mere 4 weeks of campaigning, where the Americans never seemed to stop at all. Since the beginning of this campaign, I've used a brief that I received actually from the University of Birmingham, but it was so sobering, I thought it set the tone for any of the discussions we were going to have about the future. It says, "The economy has contracted by more than 6% over the past year. Inflation is above target, and the Treasury faces the twin problems of high levels of public borrowing and falls in revenue from tax receipts. The borrowing requirement will reach nearly 170 billion in 2009-10. Public debt as a proportion of GDP will rise from its historic lows of the 2000s to perhaps as high as 80% of GDP, twice the Maastricht guideline, by the middle of the decade, fueling fears that the UK credit rating will be downgraded as financial markets fear such levels of debt cannot be sustained over the medium term. I say that because I think this election is taking place against that very sombre background, and yet, until perhaps at 8:30 this evening, we may finally get all three party leaders coming clean about the very, very difficult decisions that are going to be made about public expenditure. And one of my fears about the cities and about local government is, you said, Tony, we've all been around for quite a long time.
Kindly meant.
Kindly meant and kindly accepted. But there is, in all those years, I've been knocking around Whitehall and Westminster for about 40 years, and I know that there is a habit of the Treasury in particular and Whitehall in general to leave all the dirty decisions to local government. And I do fear that that might happen again, that local government will find some horrendous cuts in support and then be asked to balance the books by real sharp-end cuts in local services. I think Bob referred to the variety of problems that we face. I mean, it is different, London, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, and I do pay tribute to the record of the government. I was involved in the early 80s with some of those northwest cities. I was a Member of Parliament for a South Manchester constituency, although Stockport would kill me if I said that. They always thought they were in Cheshire. And I've got very strong family links with Liverpool. And I can tell you those cities were on their knees and in great despair at that time. And it is a joy now to see how those great northern cities have revitalised. And I think government intervention can take its credit for that. And as Bob said as well, we also have the self-generating successes, Cambridge, Reading, Milton Keynes, Brighton. But we also, as Bob said, had we obviously read the same brief, Bob, Doncaster, Stoke, Barnsley. And that is a real problem. I went to one northwest town where there was a considerable level of unemployment among Asian youth whose parents had been brought there to work in a textile industry that no longer existed. And the immobility of that group and the lack of opportunity in the town which they'd come to was very frightening in terms of their resentment. They felt they were British, they'd been born in Britain or been very young when they were brought to Britain, and yet the deal that had brought their parents there had disappeared. I welcome the constructive nature of this debate so far. I think the conversion of both Labour and the Conservative Party to localism is to be welcomed, and I say that with no sense of irony. I think that the same brief, you didn't go down to the page which said that we raise 17% of our local government expenditure locally against an OECD average of 55%. We are the most over-centralised of the Western democracies. And I think that one of the challenges in the coming decade will be to experiment, to allow local authorities to generate their own income, make their own plans, have more control of income. One of the reasons why I think devolution to the English regions was such a failure, was rejected, was that people aren't daft. They could see that what they were being offered was not genuine devolution, in that the purse strings were being still tightly held by Whitehall. So I think that the idea of devolution, of financial decision-making, is to be welcome. In the 80s and 90s, I used to work in public relations, working for a number of cities who were regenerating and repositioning. I always used to think every city either had to be at the heart of or the gateway. There was only two choices. They were a heart of or a gateway. But interestingly, that the research we did at that time comes up time and again, that what makes a successful city: efficient transport, affordable housing, safe streets, good schools, a healthy environment, an efficient health service. And providing that is the task that makes a city a success. Within that as well, the one particular challenge for London is that we have a great asset in the City of London, but it is an asset with problems of public credibility. And I advised the Corporation of London for quite a while. Oh, sorry. Are you okay, sir? Yeah, very good. I advised the Corporation. If I was advising them now, I think I would advise them that all three political parties, whatever the outcome of the election, will want to see from the city some realisation of their responsibility for the damage that has occurred to our economy. I said at a meeting in the city the other week that they can't behave like Millwall fans chanting, "You don't like us, but we don't care." And I think that they will have to face up to that. My conclusion as well is that this gives a useful answer to one of the problems that will be facing voters as they go to the polls next Thursday. Are the Liberal Democrats fit for office, and are we about to inflict weak and unstable government on the country? Well, as far as being fit for office is concerned, in this context, I would point out that 6 of our 8 largest cities are now governed by the Liberal Democrats, and we offer their efficient government which has a habit of getting re-elected. As for unstable government, I would claim that 2 of the more successful, in fact Bob quoted them, successful local authorities, Birmingham and Leeds, both governed by a coalition of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. This is no indication of where we're going next Thursday. I just say that when the Daily Mail tries to frighten you, there is an alternative and it does work. But I think we have seen, I think from the 3 of us, a common analysis that we've got to take our local government more local. We've got to take on board and use that local power for the environmental agenda, and we've also got to use it to provide the high-skill workforce that is going to be needed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and also for the beautifully consensual way in which the opposition was done, or the inter-party trading was done. I'm going to open it to the audience very, very soon, so you can ask a question. I just want to ask one question, perhaps briefly, of the 3 parties, and that is design. The way in which design can make the difference between a city just being a place and a city that is attractive and, in fact, economically more successful. In fact, I'll just go in the same order that you spoke originally, so starting with you, Tessa. How do you think design can make a difference, particularly if I can align design to a time when we have much less money for investment? So how can design do things that a lack of money will make otherwise more difficult?
Well, I think I've learnt a lot about this, actually, over the 5 years that we've been developing the Olympic Park, greatly assisted by Ricky Burdett and Richard Rogers, who've been really at the forefront of making sure that the buildings and the Olympic Park meet a high standard and quality of design. Now, I think that I remember one of a big political battle that I was involved in when I was a councillor in Camden, And it was at a period in the early 70s when there was an absolutely convinced view that to demolish 3 streets of, those small 2-storey Victorian houses and to replace them with a tower block on its side would give people improved amenity. And of course, those were decisions that were fashionable at the time, but proved to be absolutely disastrous. It was a big political failure by me, loss, because we lost the campaign to save the houses by 1 vote, and the ward that I represented regretted it ever after. But design is important, and I think it's a mistake to believe that design is necessarily more expensive. And I think that as we move into straitened circumstances, and there is just much less money to spend, we shouldn't believe that an inevitable consequence of that is that anything which is built by local government will inevitably be wholly functional and not very attractive, because all sorts of other things follow from that. Buildings create a footprint that if they're ugly, people don't really want to spend time in. And I think that one of the great things about London is the simplicity of a lot of the public realm. If I can just very quickly make these 2 points, Tony. One is, come to Brixton and see Windrush Square, which has just been opened. It was a piece of derelict land where there was a lot of prostitution and drug dealing until it was opened as a pure public space, a public realm in its purest sense, which attracts people. People gather there, and it is the democratic space in which people congregate as equals, and it's absolutely glorious. The second thing I'd like you to come and see is the school, the academy, which is being designed by Zaha Hadid in one of the poorest parts of my constituency, which has, serving an estate which has had the highest rate of knife crime in London. Now, how do you make young people feel that they have a value and that they're worth investment? You create a beautiful space in which they can go to school. And I had a discussion about the police, about this with the police recently, because gangs in this particular part of Brixton is a huge problem. And the borough commander, or the acting borough commander, said to me, but of course we can hope that this is the last generation of these children for whom identity and a sense of achievement can only come from gangs, because the Evelyn Grace Academy is a first-rate school that children are proud to say that they're students at. And what's more, they will be even prouder once they move out of their temporary building and into this glorious, glorious Zaha Hadid designed building, which again also creates amenity, greater amenity to this part of Brixton. So go for design. Don't put up with anything which is purely functional and ugly because people tell you that it's cheaper and we can't afford things that look beautiful. We'll regret it for the next 50 years.
Okay, thank you very much. Bob?
I think one of the things that we should do is to take on board Tessa's point, which is to recognise that good quality design, beautiful design, needn't be expensive. I think that is absolutely right. To do that, we have to think outside of the box. That requires a lot more imagination, I think, on the part of politicians and local authority officers, as much as it does on the part of developers as well. I think Terry Farrell made a very fair point about the political importance of design when he said at a meeting I was at, he envisaged the ideal situation being in a world where in a big city the mayor, say the leader of the council, was the chief urban planner. And I think that's really right. I think in city governance, urban planning in the proper sense is a really key function, and therefore we need to have a political process which brings that to the centre. Now, a couple of things stem from that. We ought to remove some of the obstacles to making sure that beautiful and inspirational is also affordable. Partly there's things we could do with the local government procurement process. That's hugely convoluted and expensive, and I think there's a great deal that we could do to strip out some of the obstacles there. Second thing that we can do, and that we would propose to do if we were in government, is to give greater emphasis within the planning considerations, within the hierarchy of planning considerations, to quality of design. As Shadow Planning Minister, I've said that we would go down the route of revising the various PPSs, PPGs which exist to create a national framework of planning priority. And within that, we will be entrenching the importance that can be given to good quality design. So I think that is absolutely crucial. The third thing that we need to do is also to change the planning process to recognise that it's linked inextricably to the political governance of great cities, so that communities themselves have a greater sense of involvement in the process, in the development of the designs. It can happen in good areas now, and there are local authorities who are doing good work, there's good practice out there. But we ought to be having a situation where those developers who take the trouble to go through quite detailed pre-application consultations with the communities where they're building, to try and take people with them, are rewarded within the planning process for that effort. And that involves, I think, entrenching the sort of work you see through inquiry by design, charrettes and so on, giving that a greater emphasis within the planning process. Also, at the other level, by getting the politicians involved in a positive rather than a negative way. Because very often at the moment, the politicians are kept at arm's length from the development of projects because of the predetermination rules which have grown up through the common law over a period of time and have been rather entrenched in the codes of conduct. So we would abolish the predetermination rule, so local councillors would not be inhibited from commenting on planning applications, and their role then will be almost as brokers on behalf of the community. And I want not just the officers to be involved with the developers in the community in the discussions, I want the politicians to be involved in there as well. And funnily enough, this may be taking bipartisanship to an extreme for me, Tony, but a good example of how that can be properly done is actually Ken Livingston, because Ken, as a one-man planning authority, worked up a system for being involved in pre-application discussions with developers for strategic projects, which was done perfectly properly, without any suggestion of any impropriety, and on a number of circumstances enabled sites to be development projects to be changed in a way which made them more acceptable, improved them. Now that's something which we should be looking to do in every local authority, and Boris, I'd say, took that on board. So there are good precedents to build that design in a really practical way through those 3 or 4 specific suggestions I've made.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom?
Yeah. My only worry of being about for a long time is I can remember local politicians being involved in planning which has ended up with them being in jail. So it's a balance on the question about beauty. I agree entirely. Beauty, imagination in design is so important in giving a quality of life to the people who live there. And Tessa's right. In a way, there's a great need for politicians and planners and architects to learn some of the lessons from the 60s and 70s. I remember going through Southwark once. My murky past involves the Labour Party, and I was driving with a Labour councillor, and there was all these great fingers of tower blocks sticking up, and he said, you know, I see those and I think of them as monuments to socialism. You always remember that. And of course, they were built with the greatest of good intentions to get rid of some of those slums after the war. Liverpool cleared street after street and decanted a whole population to Skelmersdale and to an alienation from their communities. It does really need a great deal. I've got to say, one of the most, the talk about the arrogance of politicians, I once had to attend a planners meeting, and I'd never heard so many arrogant people who knew best in my life, and I told them so as well. And also things like that look good, but do they work in practice? I remember when I was Member of Parliament for Stockport, they built a wonderful new block of houses, all heated by the most up-to-date underfloor heating. The only problem is it cost a fortune to run, and so the people switched off their underfloor heating and put paraffin heaters in, and the paraffin heaters turned all the walls black with damp. But the initial mistake was the designer who thought that people in of low incomes would be able to pay for the heating that he was designing into the property. I also agree with Tessa about the open spaces. I think it is one of the great things about London, but I think the other cities are learning as well that where you can create open spaces that people can enjoy, it lifts the whole spirit of a community. My only worry, and I think all three parties need to worry about it, and particularly in the southeast, is that the pressure on population will start to nibble at the green belt. And I do think that the green belt and the green belt around most of our big conurbations, that green belt has been one of the best pieces of social engineering, and I think we need to defend it with great care.
Okay, right, now your turn. Unusually, you don't have to say who you are. This is an election hustings. So let's try and keep the questions short. And, of course, you can say who you are if you want. You don't have to. But just trying to keep the questions short. And if I can have the answers short, and then we'll see if we can get through 8 or 9 of these in the next 30, 35 minutes. Right. Which hand did I see first? Gentleman there with a smile. Nice smile. Smile help.
Thank you. Just quickly before my question, Windrush Square is beautiful, but that redesign didn't in itself deal with drug abuse or prostitution. They've just gone round the corner. But I think overall I've been pretty uninspired by the three of you, unfortunately, because I think there's a real lack of imagination. You mentioned it, Lord McNally, that the country is now bankrupt. There is no money left. And yet no one seems to have any idea of how we're going to carry on dealing with the deprivation in society, in the cities, when there is no money. I mean, decentralization is maybe a very, going to be quite helpful, but that's not going to solve the problems. What do we do now that there is no state funding?
That's a very big question. In fairness to the speakers, we have explicitly asked them to address design and it's not for me to defend the three political parties, but they can do that for themselves. But so if I can just start by making that point, we did explicitly ask them to address the future of cities, and I agree it does include your point, but we also asked them to concentrate on the things they have concentrated on. Let me do this.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. Is design only about aesthetics, or can it also be about deprivation?
That's good. Very good. Right, well done. Very good. Now, there's a model for everybody else. We want that kind of question. Bob, you can go first this time.
I think the answer is, of course it is about more than aesthetics. I think you're absolutely right there. And how do we try and get around the fact of dealing with deprivation at a time when money is short? Well, part of it, I think, is making more effective use of such money as is available. And there's going to be some available, of course, but it is going to be tougher and tighter. So I think we have to be much, much more rigorous about concentrating the money that's available on the front line. One of my concerns, for example, with the way in which we deal with economic regeneration, which is one of the key, but not the sole key bit of dealing with deprivation, because one of the things is creating jobs, creating work for people, giving not just the money that comes from having jobs, but also the sort of sense of pride, the sense of achievement, the sort of sense of focus, if you like, to your life. That's hugely important. I think there's an awful lot of too many agencies are involved at the moment, chasing round limited pots of money. I think we need to really rigorously slim down the number of agencies which are involved in this. Thames Gateway is the most complicated example, where it looks like the wiring diagram of an exocet or something like that to work out how the funding streams go. So I think we need to take a very rigorous approach to concentrate that. And my preference is to concentrate it via mechanisms which are democratically accountable. Second thing is to reckon that the public sector may not always be the best deliverer of these things. It will generally be the commissioner of this work, but in many ways it may be either the private sector or social enterprises and the third sector may be as effective at delivering programmes to get people back into work, for example, to set up projects to deal with particular areas of youth advantage, to get schools going in particular areas. So I think an open-mindedness in the way in which we commission and deliver would be an important point of it. And concentrating programmes themselves. So we've, for example, pledged that we should have a single programme to get, a single work programme for young people, and expect of young people at an early stage that if they're not able to get into employment or training, then they ought to be giving something back to society in other ways to encourage a broader sense of involvement within the community. Now, none of those are going to be a silver bullet. I think you'd be dishonest of any politician to say that they are. But I think taken together, they can make a real contribution to both making the money go further, and secondly, saying to people, this isn't just about the state coming along and doing something either to you or for you. It's about the state acting as a facilitator and an encourager, which then pulls other organisations, individuals and voluntary groups in with them. And I think there's a real role for governments in the cities at all levels to be much more imaginative involved in that.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, I think a lot of hard thinking is going on. If we sound like, as Bob just said, we have no silver bullets, that's because it's true. On the other hand, you're wrong, we're not bankrupt. We're going to face a very difficult time. They faced a very difficult time just after the war. We faced a very difficult time in the mid-70s. Countries as strong as we are and as rich as we are should be able to manage this. But we have got some tough decisions to make. I think there is going to be a rethink about the problem of welfare dependency, that group in the whatever percentage you give it, who don't seem to be able to break out of welfare dependency. I think there is going to be more use of the third sector, voluntary organisations, to see if they can handle some of these matters better. But what I do worry, when the Institute of Fiscal Studies made their pronouncements the other day, they didn't make any pronouncements about or I didn't see any, of what cuts that they were talking about would have on unemployment. And as Mrs. Thatcher found in the 1980s, you can allow unemployment to rise to solve one perceived economic problem, but it doesn't save your public expenditure because you're then spending it on unemployment benefit. And that's why we, the Liberal Democrats, do share the government's analysis that until we're more convinced that the recovery is sustained and sustainable, we should keep the present levels of expenditure going, because I do fear a double recession. I do fear rising unemployment, and I do fear if the approach to the deficit is simply slash and burn, that maintaining social cohesion will become very, very difficult. So I think it's going to be difficult for dealing with the kind of problems you're going to say. There's going to be less money, and we're going to have to concentrate that money more than perhaps we've done before. But like Bob, I don't offer any silver bullets.
Okay, Tessa?
I think it was Mario Cuomo who said, we campaign in poetry and we govern in prose. So I'm sorry if you've had too much prose this evening. But what I would say is that, Tom is right. we are in a very, very...
You're supposed to say, I agree with Tom. That's
Not this week. That was only the first week. That's over. But I think the point is that we've got to look at not just how we save the money in the short term, but how we build a long-term platform for recovery. And the fact about London is that by 2015, 50% of the jobs in London will require people with graduate level or above qualifications. So we will never rebuild a sustainable economy for London unless we invest in skills. It's one of the great achievements, actually, that I hope the Olympics will be able to look back on, that the populations of those Olympic boroughs are more skilled after the Olympics than was the case beforehand, because a pool of a skilled workforce will create the jobs which in turn create growth. And in London, it's highly likely that greater growth will be in the creative industries and will also be in the, as I said earlier, in the green economy. So I think that the other risk, sorry, this deals with the deprivation bit of your very elegant question. The other great risk, and it's something that I worry about with London London a lot, is that it is a tale of two cities. One city enjoyed by the very rich, and another a city of the very poor. And I think Bob referred to the child poverty figures. Actually, child poverty has come down very substantially to round about 30% from 39%, 39% at the time that Labour came into power. And that's come about by a number of means: Sure Start, better education, tax credits. And that's why, the child tax credits and the child trust funds are so important. Child trust funds, because the great driver of inequality in London is not so much income inequality, but it's inequality in wealth. And you have a city of enormous variations of wealth. The big challenge for poor families who may never face the prospect of owning their own home in London is to build some assets, because only by enabling families to build assets do you have any kind of chance of dealing with the degree of wealth inequality.
Okay, now, we're going well. I'm going to beg both questioners and answerers to be a fraction shorter so we can get through more, he said ominously. Right. Let's try in the very middle here, just to make it difficult to get the... let's try and right in the middle here. Oh, well, there were two of you. Actually, I did mean next door. I'm sorry.
Could I perhaps... No.
Yeah.
Could I perhaps ask the converse question? And is city design about more than deprivation? We've heard a lot about economic growth, about wealthy cities. Are cities about more about that, about transport, about density, about open spaces, about quality of life, rather than just wealth and money?
Okay, quality of life as well as wealth and money. Can we really try very hard to keep it short?
Yeah.
Tom?
Yeah.
Tom,
well,
Tessa?
One of the things that will keep London ahead of Frankfurt and other competing financial capitals is that London does offer a better quality of life. When I worked for the Corporation of London, we did a very in-depth survey of the people who were actually working in the city. And it was very interesting, actually, that the top requirement was good transport. And when asked why they liked working in London, the top was the cultural diversity of London. I think, as you say, when you go to the other end of the scheme, people are looking for a more holistic offer than just a big wage packet. I mean, I've nothing against Zurich, and I'm sure that it's a very nice place to live, but not all the money in the world would persuade me to live in Zurich, whereas I'm very happy and did for 40 years live in London.
I think you lost the Zurich vote.
I know.
Tessa?
Yes, absolutely. More about quality of life, and Tom is right that one of the reasons that London has been such a successful engine of wealth is that people want to come and live here, and they want to come and live here not just to earn a decent income, but they want to come and live here because it's an absolutely lovely place to live, and the culture of London, the museums, galleries, theatres are a major draw. And every time people are asked what are the qualities of London that they value, they put those, and they tend to put those higher than that this is a place to do business. And I was just talking again. I'm about to lose both the Geneva and the Lewis Hamilton vote very quickly, because Lewis Hamilton was waxing lyrical to me a couple of years ago about the joys of living in Geneva, and I just thought how sad that you want to live in Geneva rather than in London, and pay a bit more in tax in London, but enjoy the amazing city that London is. Now, before I start getting myself into a lot of trouble, I don't know Geneva except Lake Geneva, which is beautiful, but I'm afraid it's a wholly partisan, heartfelt expression of my love of London. I sort of think, how could you possibly want to live anywhere else when you could live in London?
No,
Tony,
do you want to choose on a Swiss city? And if it's been
is this going to be the theme of the evening?
Is anybody here from Switzerland? Don't see anybody. That's a mercy, isn't it? Right. Okay, Bob.
Just wait till Twitter gets going.
Yes.
When I was a student here, three of us went on an old Ford Consul down to Italy, and the car broke down in Luzerne on the way back. and I wouldn't want to have a car break down in Luzerne if I could have it break down in London, now, if that's any help.
Right, that's the three. Keep going.
And again, we are going to be all saying I agree with Tom. Of course it's about those other things as well. You're absolutely right. The two inevitably interlinked, so that's the key thing. It's the financial success that produces the wealth which can then be reinvested in some measure in the quality of life. So you can't have that good quality without it, but it's not the be-all and the end-all. That's the key thing. The other thing I was going to say is I agree with what everyone said about the fantastic offer that London has. It's also worth remembering that sometimes all of us, and certainly observers from outside, think of the London offer largely in terms of the centre of London. And all the huge goods and wonderful things are there. But of course, there's a huge lot more than London. This is about to be a
promotion for Dulwich Park, the Dulwich Picture Gallery.
Well, actually, it is exactly part of that, isn't it? Most Londoners live in the suburbs. And what we mustn't forget, too, is the importance of the quality of life that the suburbs can bring. Lots of people put up with a less than pleasant commute up from my constituency and parts of Tessa's constituency and so on, because they value the suburbs, and that comes back to the point Tom made in relation to an earlier question about getting the balance right. So you keep the green spaces, you keep the established family housing that's hugely important for people in the suburbs, and balance that off with the vibrancy that you get in the city centre, and getting those two bits, remember they're both key parts of the equation, is really important.
Tony, can I just make this one very short point as well? The interesting thing about culture as part of regeneration is Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle, Gateshead have all made major investments in their cultural offer as part of their regeneration, and it's been part of the success of those cities.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, woman here. Yep. Now let's really try and speed up and see how many we can get. Yep, go on.
Okay, I'd like to ask all three of you what your attitude is towards the increasing privatisation of what used to be public space in all our cities. We're increasingly seeing public squares, buildings, shopping malls, all kinds of areas not being run by the police anymore, but being run by private security guards according to all sorts of weird rules that are imposed by the companies that own these spaces.
Okay.
And what your
It's a very good question.
policies are.
Question. Tessa, privatised public space, what?
Well, I'm in favour of shopping malls within reason, but I don't like the idea of what have been public spaces being, people being excluded from, what have been public spaces. And I think that, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, and I can't think of a reason why you could ever make a case for privatising what had previously been a public space shared by all. And actually, one of the things that I am very keen on, and we've offered in our manifesto, for instance, is which is not privatisation, and it's not simply sort of control by the council, is the development of cooperative approaches to the development of land and development of community facilities. I hate those tracts of land which are usually used for, as dogs' lavatories or scrubby bits of bushes in the middle of council estates between blocks. And where councils have been really creative, like Lambeth Council, which is part of my constituency, they've been given to the tenants and residents to develop as they want to. And they've developed them as allotments or communal gardens or whatever. So I think that, we don't want London taken over by shopping malls or other, commercial development. We do want London as a city that celebrates its public space. And that's why we can talk more about the displacement from Windrush Square, but Windrush Square and that part of Brixton will change it.
Okay. Bob.
I think we'll be careful about the terminology that we use, because in many cases what we're talking about here is that the land may be privately owned, it may have been privately acquired, but it is nonetheless very often open to the public. But I accept that sometimes an issue as to the conditions that are set upon that access. Now, there's a bit of a trade-off here. On the one hand, there's a question to what extent the state should interfere with proprietary rights. The other point is the value of encouraging landowners to make the public able to get into a lot of those lands. I'll give you an example where I think it's the sort of thing you may be thinking about. When I was on the London Assembly, I was always having terrible trouble, and so was Ken, and I think so does Boris now, if you tried to film or do an interview outside City Hall, because it's owned by More London, and they really didn't like these dangerous people. Ken and I might have been regarded as dangerous people, but it's questionable, doing interviews with journos outside More London Bridge. And I've got to say, I think that was pretty over the top. On the other hand, if they did something to stop people doing skateboarding at about 50 miles an hour through crowds of people, that perhaps was a more desirable and sensible approach to it. So I think it's, firstly, when local authorities give the planning permission, seeing what they can do in terms of the conditions of the set, to be constructive and talking that through to make sure that there is sensible public access. And secondly, I do think perhaps we need to have a conversation with some of the big property companies in London, saying, I hope the Mayor can do, and to find a more enlightened approach. That on the one hand, you get the benefits of the private investment, bringing these bits of land back into use, but on the other hand, you don't get something which is so paranoid and over the top that you make it sort of unpleasant. We've got a shopping mall in Bromley, actually, where they're pretty good there. They do have security guards for obvious reasons, but they're pretty sensible. They let charity collections go on and so on. So that's a more sensible sort of model.
Tom.
At one stage, I was the Director General of the Retail Consortium, and I used to make speeches about shopping the new leisure experience, which my wife finds absolutely hilarious, since the most I spend in any shop is about 2 minutes if I'm buying anything. But there is a balance. I mean, if you create a shopping mall, you do want to give people a pleasant experience, and therefore you use your own staff to try and make sure that they do get that. And the problem is that these public spaces within shopping malls can become gathering points that make people feel threatened or uncomfortable. and thus destroy the experience. With all these things, it's a balance. And I think that the shopping malls, the best ones, manage to do it, as Bob said, without being over officious, but do make sure that the bulk of people using them get to use them for what they're intended.
Okay, now have we? Let's try a question. Anybody on architecture, planning, aesthetics? Let's try and I'm sorry, I don't want to. Okay, gentleman here, go on. Design, that kind of thing.
Can the Conservatives and Liberals be specific about how they will, or what agency or vehicle they'll use to deliver good design?
Right.
And Tessa, could she explain what green technologies actually means? Because she claims that they're creating work in that area.
I'm so sorry. I'm just having difficulty hearing you.
The first no, it's all right. The first question, I think, was could you ask Tom and Bob about how precisely they would deliver improved design quality. Or agency to do it. Okay, yeah. And to Tessa, see, that's really two questions in one. Actually, let's stick with the first one, and then I'll ask it to Tessa as well. Let's start Tom this time.
Well, one thing I think is whoever is commissioning it should do so with a degree of humility and with a maximum of public consultation, not least with the people who are going to have to live with what you're commissioning, what you're designing. And the big lesson of the 60s or 70s was this, not the man in Whitehall knows best, but the planner in the town hall knows best. And quite often those kind of decisions destroyed whole communities or created buildings which were a nightmare to live in. I mean, you can go now round London and find 60s or 70s blocks with blind alleys, dangerous parts where people were afraid to go. And I just think that if we're going to learn the lesson of that period, which I think was a bleak period for planning and design, it is to talk to the people who are going to have to use those facilities.
Can I just chip in? I mean, do you think that, and this is to all three of you, that there should be an agency or agencies that are kept going in order to give advice on aesthetics to politicians?
No, absolutely not. No, you're having a laugh.
Right, okay.
Economic downturn.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it at the kind of thing. First of all, in terms of the planning process, I think there's a couple of things that we can do in practical terms. One, as I said, is actually mainstreaming consideration of design into the planning process. And the way I envisage doing that, as I said, first of all, is in our proposal to revise the PPS, PPGs, supplementary planning guidance and so on, into this overarching framework of planning priorities, like they have in Scotland and Wales, which works well. We would include in that much more specific guidance, and we'll consult on the detail of it, because I don't want to impose it from above, I want to take people with us. Much more specific guidance on the weight that should be given to the quality of design in both individual applications and in master planning, for example, and that would then be fed through into the local development plans of the individual authorities, and would be a significant consideration if it ever came to questions of appeal. So that's how I build that bit into it for a start. The second thing, which I think is important there, is to have some means of ensuring that there is access to good practice, that there is access to the best ideas which are out there at the moment. I mean, I talk to CAVE at the moment. I don't think we need to have another body created. CAVE's there, it does valuable work. I think it's got a good relationship with all the political parties. It doesn't claim to be a repository of all wisdom, but there's a starting point. And I think what we're wanting to do if we were in government is in the reforms to the planning process, not just to be talking to CAVE, but be talking to all the key players. Britain's got some brilliant architects, international architects of the highest order. And I hope any new planning minister would actually be sitting down, getting these guys round the table and say, what are the key bits that we should be looking to put in to those sets of planning priorities to ensure that can be entrenched in the system. We don't have a huge rate quango to do it, but what you do is you use, if you like, the leverage ability that the Minister has to pull those people together.
Tessa.
I agree with that. If you had an agency that kind of to which was subcontracted the consciousness of design, you would never get the mainstream organisations learning to design well. So that's why using the leverage of planning powers, but building an intelligence and sensitivity to good design is best done by an expectation that you develop this capacity in local authorities, housing associations and central government.
Right, okay. I'm going to take over there, yes, woman over there, and then gentleman over there. So let's have to keep these quite short now. We're running up towards the witching hour.
Bob's comment on skateboarding reminded me that I was in a French town a couple of years ago where they actually built a feature in the town centre just for skateboarders. And I was also in Lisbon recently where I noticed that the police have embraced segways. I just wondered how important you thought that alternative means of transport are to be integrated into developing cities, by which I mean not cars.
Alternative, you don't... Right, alternative means of transport. No, I mean, were you seeing skateboards as a means of transport? That was the thing. Yes, yeah, well, fair enough. All right, yeah, no, fair enough. Well, alternative means of transport.
Yeah,
decarring cities.
Decarring, I think in the right circumstances, they're a very important part of the mix. And it's going to vary, I think, from city to city how best you do it, and also within parts of the cities. So, for example, it's much easier to provide alternatives within the centre of London than it is in parts of the suburbs, in Bromley, for example, or something like that, where it's much more spread out. I'm a firm believer in walking. I do about the only decent form of exercise I do, for example, is walking. And that's why I attach a lot of importance to design in the public realm, so that places are actually attractive for people to walk, and hopefully attractive for people to walk for most of the day, not just during the hours when it's light and so on. So it's got a raft of design issues there. I'm very pro-bike. I'm a retired cyclist now, and I think we can do more with that. Getting about it. So I don't have an aversion to new ideas like skateboards. I was recently looking at cleverer types of technology for cars. My colleague Greg Clark, who's the Shadow Environment Secretary, and I were looking at a production facility for some really very impressive electric cars, which can give you the same sort of performance as you get out of saloon cars and so on. So we need to make sure that we build into the planning process the means of getting the charging points and so on. I'm totally up for that. I would have been arguing the case. I don't think the money's going to be there in the immediate future for looking at extending the Croydon tram link further into Bromley. These are all things which can be sensibly done. Sometimes that depends upon resource being available. I'm totally open-minded. That's what we need, is politicians to be open-minded and say there's not a one-size-fits-all, but you do require a bit of sensitivity to each area to reflect the sort of particular geographic and spatial needs of the area and the sort of demands of the population that you're going to be putting upon it.
Okay. Tessa,
a high priority for charging points, 100,000 across the UK in the over the lifetime of the next Parliament, so getting people to use more electric cars and the quality of electric cars, obviously, to improve. And, I think the more London can become a cyclist city, the better a city it will be. But the important thing is that it's safe for cyclists, and the more people cycle, the safer it's likely to become. But I'm absolutely with you, and the more we can get out of our cars and onto other forms of transport, the better a city London will be.
During my murky PR days, I was hired by a company that tried to persuade Haringey Council to construct a ski lift type from the nearest tube station to Ali Pali. But unfortunately, not even Haringey Council would buy it.
Sort of bungee jump.
But no, I agree. I think we have we are getting away from the complete obsession with the car, and it's great that we are looking at different options.
Okay, I'll take one. We are coming up to 8 o'clock. Are you all just one more?
I've got just
one more. One more. Okay.
No.
All right, you've got the mic. Sorry, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just a very quick question, basically about school playing fields. I mean, we talked about open spaces, but I would say one of the great tragedies is a lot of children growing up without being able to play on a playing field or a park or something near them. I think that's very important. And I wonder if your parties have policies on protecting open spaces and specifically for people to be able to have a space to play in, for children to play in.
Right.
No, I agree. I think the loss of school playing fields has been a disaster. And I know, as Tessa is about to probably tell us, that under Labour they were made to replace them with other leisure facilities. But I know from my own youth there's nothing better than just an open green field to play on.
Tessa.
Well, Tom, I hate to disabuse you of this, but today kids would really like sort of all-weather surfaces to play on, decent showers and all the rest of it. And there has been, and it's part of the
That's what's
programme.
wrong with the youth of the day.
I knew you were going to say that. But I mean, one of the things, the investment through the Building Schools for the Future programme is improving the quality of sports facilities in every school. You cannot sell off a playing field now unless there is an absolutely compelling argument that means the school will be able to offer better sport. And, there are some examples like, playing fields that were sold after a school was closed, or bits of playing fields that were sold in order to build a pavilion so that the kids would have somewhere to shelter if the weather was very wet. But sport in schools, in state schools, is one of the quiet revolutions of the last 8 years. And by the time we get to the Olympics, children in state school and up to the age of 16 will play 5 hours of sport a week, and very importantly, and competing. And that has necessitated, a huge increase in the investment in facilities.
Well, I think there's quite a bit of consensus here. I'm delighted that there's now a move back towards competitive sports in schools. Some of us remember a time when that was regarded as being terribly politically incorrect. I'm glad with that. What I think most people regard as the sensible approach to all of that. And within my approach to planning, it does seem to me that, given that my party are committed to bringing in a presumption in favour of only sustainable development, part of that test of sustainability should be taking into account those needs to maintain both recreational space and green space. So I think we're all pretty much at one on that.
Okay, we're at just after 8 o'clock. I think it would be fair, it's an election, if I could just ask, in as many or fewer words as each of you wish to, one final pitch, as it were, for why your party is the one that people should vote for if they value cities and their future. We do it in reverse order from the start. So, Tom, what one thing would convince us all to vote Liberal Democrat?
Because if either of these two go back with a majority on the 7th of May, within a week we'll be back to the same old party politics, yaboo, the things that they're most comfortable in. If you really want to put a firework under a political system that has caused so much public concern, then light a firework for the Liberal Democrats.
Bob.
Cities need strong leadership, and what you need by strong leadership is not only a clear policy from government in particular, therefore a clear mandate to deal with the economic mess that the country's in, but also a party which has a commitment to giving power back to cities in a meaningful way that includes transferring resource back into the hands of those who run the cities. And the Conservative Party is the only party which, with its pledges on local government finance reform, are committed to giving back a measure of resource towards local authorities, and also with the power of general competence to give them the legal and delivery tools to enable them actually to give that strong leadership and that strong steer, sometimes with a mayor if they want it, otherwise with a strong, as George Jones would say, a political council leader.
Okay. And finally, Tessa.
Okay, because only Labour has a plan for reducing the deficit that will safeguard frontline public services, and only Labour is committed perhaps to the biggest ambition of all, which is winning power in order to give it away, because powerful cities are great places to live, places that people become proud to live in. Communities don't exist in abstract. They exist because of the combination of public investment, private confidence, and the growth of a public realm in which democracy at a local level can flourish. So that's why you should vote Labour next Thursday.
Thank you all. I'm sorry for those of you who didn't. Loads of questions, loads of points. I'm sure you grabbed the politicians at the end. Thank you all for coming. I'd just like to say it's election time. Politicians work terribly hard. They've come here this evening. I think the magic of elections can never be understated. And those who take part in them and fight to get our votes deserve huge credit. So I'd like to thank you all on all our behalf and everything.